Okay, folks, now, we had a lot of questions about the foundation. Earlier today, we had a little working group meeting where we talked about what the foundation is going to bring. And I would basically say that the questions fell into two categories from that group. And that was really around how the foundation will be structured and how we will interact with the foundation and what kind of services they will provide. And then the other one was really around how will code be contributed. And so I'd like to start off just the first question to Mike, which is really around from the organization perspective, what are some of the expectations from the organization at a high level, not on the code side, but on what should we see, like some of the first activities or things that you would expect, starting with the announcement of like an executive director. We're going to use this mic, so go ahead.
So the question again is on the business side?
Yeah.
So it's a good question. I think as I kind of touched on earlier, we have a bit of a war chest now to really drive a couple things. I think one is that connection to the community. I think Pivotal's been trying to carry the weight for a while there, but having one thing I didn't mention that I should is we've contracted with the Linux Foundation. They offer foundation as a service. So they offer back office and marketing and legal and sort of technical communications as well. So we have their team starting to support Cloud Foundry. So I think one of the big changes will be just resources to go deliver against this stuff. The second is, a lot of this money will go towards driving a brand around this certification so that it's well understood what Cloud Foundry is and there's this common core and these sorts of things. And then the other is IP. Lawyers are expensive, and keeping IP clean is an important piece. So I think you'll see all of that stuff take a level up. In terms of an executive director, the folks that aren't familiar with foundations, that's the CEO, I guess. So we have a couple candidates. Yeah. All right. We have a couple candidates. We plan to announce our selection next month. And he will be sort of the CEO to kind of drive a lot of this. So I think that, we've been sort of running really hard to stand it up. We pushed hard. We got it to the end of the year. There's a lot of documentation out there, drives a lot of the details and structure around it. But now there's just an army behind this that can stand up and make it work.
Now, Mike was telling me that Killian actually had a lot to do with the earlier stages of forming the organization that is now the foundation. Killian, could you just share with us what are some of the expectations you would expect from the foundation at this point?
Sure, yeah. Hey, so just to introduce myself quickly, I started working on Cloud Foundry in April of 2010. I was the PM on the project at VMware for 4 years until I left earlier this year. So I was on when we were putting together the foundation, I was working with these guys on it. So, so actually, there's quite an interesting historical perspective on that. We started out working with the Spring guys, if those of you are familiar with Spring Framework. And when we first started looking at open sourcing Cloud Foundry, so we open sourced it about a year after I joined. We actually first started looking at the Spring Framework model, which was a benevolent dictatorship type model. And so that's where we went initially. And frankly, we kind of screwed up in our engagement with the community in a variety of ways. And so the thing is that the way that open source works has changed quite a bit, even in the last 4 years, but certainly in the last decade, right? And so so Spring, for example, was driven by a small group of clever people who kind of had total control over the project. And there really weren't a lot of commercial concerns involved in Spring. It sort of ran on top of a set of commercial concerns. But when you look at Cloud Foundry or OpenStack or Docker and things like this, right, there's a bunch of commercial concerns involved in these open source projects. And so how you organize the project has to kind of acknowledge that and allow some of that to happen in a way that's comfortable for everybody. And so when we were putting this together, there were a bunch of people who'd been on the OpenStack Foundation, so I actually don't work for anybody right now, so I can tell the truth. And so I'm kind of dangerous in the room. But from my point of view, obviously the OpenStack guys have had a lot of success, but they also made some mistakes, right, just as we did. And so one of the mistakes they made, I would say, is that they grew the community early before they had something that kind of worked and was coherent, right? So okay, by screwing up Cloud Foundry early on, maybe we successfully made something that was coherent before we grew the community. So there you go. We were super clever, right? You look at like something that's been interesting to me, right, is the Docker thing and how Docker is going, and the CoreOS guys feel threatened by the direction of Docker because there's a commercial interest and stuff like that. And so, you can kind of see that, all right, in the Cloud Foundry world, does Pivotal's commercial interest drive the direction of the Cloud Foundry project, thereby threatening IBM, or whoever, HP or somebody, and forks it and blah, 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 right? And so that's exactly the kind of stuff we wanted to avoid, right? So the Cloud Foundry Foundation, right, is intended to be essentially an independent vehicle to push the project in directions that make sense for the project and for the community as a whole, right? And there's no question that the platinum players do have a big say. They put up a lot of money and stuff, and so me as an individual who doesn't work for any of the platinum players, probably I can participate very much so in the foundation, but I'm not on the board, right? But all those players have a say and they have a seat at the table, and that at least means that it's probably difficult to accuse the project of being driven by a single commercial interest, right? And that's an important thing, right? From my point of view, the product, because there are products now, Active State have one, Pivotal guys have one, and HP and IBM and so on, right? And then there's a bunch of consulting work, and we've heard from all these people, right? It's pretty coherent, right? And so as you add stuff to it now, you're building on something that actually works and is in production somewhere, right? And I think that's a big deal, right? I think there's a really advantageous position to be in, right, for this project versus others. And so, so what do I expect, right? I expect changes to be driven by customer needs and customer expectations. Where do they need the project to go? But those are actually driven by production concerns, right? What do we need to do in production for these apps in these various different verticals? So that's what I expect. I expect the people who are involved in it really to frankly be quite responsive to that, and within the framework of a product and a project that is coherent and works well, right? There's places you plug stuff in. This is where it goes, right? You don't just invent a whole new one. And that's the kind of stuff we were trying to avoid, and I think, I hope at least, the structure we put together accomplishes that. Sorry that was long-winded, I'm Irish.
Okay, well thank you very much, Killian. And Andrew, as one of the first big members of the community, and also running Cloud Foundry as a service as Bluemix, and now with your own distribution, like what are the things that you expect from this community? How will it change, or what are the benefits you see?
Okay, so first, I hope you mean IBM is big and not I'm big, but we all have those paranoias. Our shirts are double XL and
Yeah,
sysadmin medium only, apparently. So, so I guess it goes with the territory. Thanks, Dave.
Sure.
So things that we're excited about with the community, or that we're interested in about the community, and I think on the IBM side, we've had a bunch of experiments, mostly successful on the open source side, and we've learned probably in the last 15 years the fastest way to get agreement on an integration point is not just to write the paper spec and standard. It's to get people implementing it, and for all the little behavioral nits and weird things that people don't think to put a syntax spec around. That is truly where we see, open source is if you've got to agree on something to be able to plug in other tools, other things, best way to get everybody to agree on it is just use the same darn code. So in that sense, we're pretty excited anytime there's reasonable industry agreement, 40 plus companies that say, yep, we're gonna use the same code to solve that problem. That's a pretty powerful statement that there's something there that everybody is going to work hard enough on that one implementation to just use it as is. In terms of where we hope it is going forward, we certainly now in the cloud space see that between OpenStack, Cloud Foundry, and now with the Docker community growing and moving towards open governance, we think we've got a pretty powerful set of components. And the Docker guys did put me up to wearing a T-shirt today. That was a little agreement that we made. So I'll abstain from question number 3 actually because of that. But no, we actually see that there's a fairly powerful set of building blocks on this sort of next generation of how we use Linux and how we use open source to build applications, to build full solutions, to simplify the life cycle. And this was such a, I guess, daunting problem that every time we touch one of these communities that has one of the key building blocks, we see it ramp up, almost 10x per year in terms of participation. And the thing that really accelerates that participation is actually having a good governance structure in place. And we've seen between Apache, Eclipse, Linux, now OpenStack, and now with the structure that's a little bit unique to Cloud Foundry, we've seen those foundations evolve to match the way people want to do development. So why didn't we just think that one of the existing structures was perfect for Cloud Foundry? Well, we actually saw something kind of special in the way people worked on the code in Cloud Foundry. So we saw all the precedents in terms of legal agreement, in terms of structure, in terms of governance boards, but we made sure we adapted it a little as the foundation and advisory board came together to make sure it could match the rate and pace at which people were actually enhancing Cloud Foundry. And this idea of agile programming, this idea of pair programming, the idea of Dojo, those were something that didn't necessarily get entrenched into any of the earlier open source communities. So, what we're hopeful for is that it will have the agreement, the excitement, the participation from a mix of industry users, vendors, consumers, and operators that we've seen in other communities like OpenStack, but we'll still maintain something that's pretty special to Cloud Foundry, which is the test-driven, agile, everybody looks at a line of code twice, pair programming type mentality. So we're hoping that it will, continue to grow on the crazy pseudo-exponential community path it's been growing on, but it will also keep that special thing that the community is, focused on really high quality, test-driven code, and it'll be, that's our next experiment, if we want to call it that, in how to build an extremely vital, developer driven community that includes input from users, vendors, and operators of the cloud solution.
Okay, great.
I think I was even more long-winded than my previous two
You
colleagues
just might
here.
be Irish.
I might be Irish.
Okay, thank you. All right, Kay, so speaking of the community, now we're going to try to keep this moving along, but I would like to ask if you have any questions. So are there any questions from the audience about the foundation and what you hope for it to do? Anybody out there have a question?
Yes,
Anybody
it's all
have a
capitals
question?
now.
Anyone? Anyone have a question? Okay, all right, okay, fine, I see the hand. All right, Dr. Nick, what's your question?
Is there, amongst the platinums especially, is there any sort of notion of how they all compete with each other? So how are they going to make wholesale major contributions? And I can't help but think to that lovely Docker service that IBM has built. And are they going to make it open source, or is it, are we not even allowed to ask?
Okay, so are you asking? I just want to repeat the question for the audience here. So you're asking what kind of contributions you think the
Right. I mean, what is the Cloud Foundry code base? Is it just whatever Pivotal built and everyone else just wants it?
Okay.
Or is IBM going to make wholesale major contributions like?
Okay, all right. So Andrew, you get to answer that question. Do
I
you
get
think?
to answer first. Okay.
Do you get to? The question really was, what kind of contributions do you think IBM will
He's always allowed
offer?
to ask questions. We don't ignore Nick's hand in this. It's a community kind of.
I mean, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any notion of that becoming part of it, or is this just going to be the way it is? There's stuff that exists and everything else is how the team plays.
So I think in terms of, what is Cloud Foundry going forward, certainly there's a solid base to start from. And then from there, the reason these boards exist is to decide what's in and what's out, right? I mean, we could back up a dump truck of 1 million lines of code, but that probably wouldn't be appropriate, right? It still has to be developed in the spirit that this community was launched in, with the process that we think is special to the Cloud Foundry community. So in terms of, what's in and what's out, I mean, the community will decide that, the advisory board, the foundation going forward. And yeah,
Mob rules.
on the Docker side. So certainly, what's going on with Diego and Docker alignment is probably step one in that direction of aligning, what Cloud Foundry does with its lifecycle around the application lifecycle, and how different container technologies can be implemented as backends into that. And if you look at kind of 3 people in the community that are pretty much full-time invested in that project. Where that goes next, also partly depends a little bit on how quickly, I would say, the community doesn't interlock with other communities. I mean, we were actually pretty excited and pretty happy that in the early days that Docker got very excited about joining and aligning with Cloud Foundry. So we actually like to see these open source communities align. We actually are pretty open proponents of saying that probably the best cloud you can build involves things like Cloud Foundry and OpenStack. So community alignment's a good thing. And then in terms of when IBM writes code, yeah, we think if we've got other people who are going to collaborate with us to enhance something, absolutely we're open to that discussion if the community is open to taking it. Are we going to back up a whole bunch of code and dump it on Cloud Foundry and say, thou shalt eat it? That's generally not the way we behave. But, other people may choose to do wholesale contributions. Yeah.
Okay, we need to move on, but
Yeah, I think it's more than yes, it will be great. It's actually letting the community start to get its legs under it and run. And we're not gonna disenfranchise the community by dumping boatloads of code on it tomorrow. But it's certainly you've touched on one that's very interesting to us. And yeah, absolutely, we want to see more alignment there.
And just to answer that part, Dr. Nick, for the service broker, there was an IBMer in our team actually who also contributed to the open source Docker service broker. It's a slightly variation of what Ferdy did, but Ferdy being Ferdy and so popular in the community, that took off. So yes, whenever we have opportunity, we do contribute.
okay. Hey, Dr. Nick, thank you very much, but we do need to keep going here. This is supposed to be a lightning panel. A lightning panel. Okay.
Hey, so there's just okay. So while beating up the vendor is kind of fun, just to talk about that in a more generic context. So the foundation's organized so that the sort of business governance side of things is completely separated from the technical stuff. So this set of technical efforts with technical committees who are essentially who are the committers, right? Who are the people involved in building those pieces of code. And if they want to add something to it, they get to add something to it. And that's perfectly fine, right? And so if there's an obvious component that needs to be built, Nick, you have one, right? And say that some large Acme Corporation vendor has built one but doesn't want to open source it, the technical committee will probably say, hey, we need one of those and start building it, right? And they'd be kind of, then that corporation will be kind of foolish, right? To have something that's different. But, people judge these interests differently. So I think, to answer your question, Nick, right, the technologists involved in the different parts of the project get to decide what's in and what's out, and if something needs to be built or not. And if a vendor wants to contribute one of those components, they get to do it. And if they don't, they don't. We did spend a little time, and hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn. Hang on one second. Trying to figure out how the hell do you hold people accountable for contributions, right? Do you say, Johnny, You know, you're in the foundation, therefore thou shalt commit 10,000 lines of code, it's just an awful process, and it just doesn't work at all. So there you go. What's up, Nick? You've got something else.
Persistent services is a major part of making a platform useful.
Great.
And we don't have a good one.
Yeah.
Is the foundation, amongst the platinum members who obviously want to be successful, going to actually one of them ante up and start one, or are we all just going to build one each?
Well, unless one of them want to hire me, I can't answer that. So.
Yeah. We need to answer that question quickly and move on, actually. So.
I don't think the answer is the platinums, Nick. I think it's the technical side of the house, right? The platinums don't tell you what to build. Now, can IBM go donate it? Sure, right? I mean, I think we'd love for that, but it's their call.
Okay, we can take one more question. We'll take it from John in the back.
This might already exist, but in the community, is there any kind of a collective voting process where people vote on services, or they vote on capabilities and say, this is what we would like, and then people can vote behind it?
Okay, let me just repeat that real quick. So John was asking, in the community, is there a way for the community to vote about what features they would like to be in the project?
Yeah, so indirectly, yes. The voting we try not to do, because what we found is it slows everything down. So there is a provision where dedicated committers can vote if it's necessary. In general, what we've been doing is operating by consensus, and we've had IBM and SAP and others in the room, so they know this works. And there's processes where inceptions are decided on what we're going to build next, and the folks that build it get in the room and decide how they're going to build it and when, and go deliver against it. So there is a voting mechanism, but it's really for when lots of people can't agree or when there's bad actors. But our intent is not, vote, because that sucks.
Okay, great. So we do need to get going. So I'd like to thank the three of you for getting up here and taking the shots and giving us your feedback. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mike.